Hey, welcome to another Enneagram podcast.
Yeah, that's right. Yet another Enneagram podcast. But this one's different. Another Enneagram podcast is here to help you be a better leader for your team.
We know leadership is already challenging enough, and it can be downright frustrating when your team communication breaks down.
Another Enneagram podcast is here to tell you stories of leaders just like you who are learning how to lead their teams better with the Enneagram. If you want your team to communicate better, be more productive, and love their jobs, another Enneagram podcast is for you. Hey, welcome back to another Enneagram podcast. You got your host, Ryan, and your host, Cody, just like always. And we are in the middle of our top 10 questions about the Enneagram series today, talking about number 4. Cody, how you feeling? You ready for this one? Are you getting tired of this yet?
No, man, I'm feeling great. This is fun.
Good? Okay. All right. Number 4 then. Can your number change over time?
So I'm assuming they're talking about your dominant type.
Yes. Yep. Your core Enneagram number.
Okay. Well, I'm going to come out of the gate swinging. No, it cannot.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. Some people just got really upset. No, I'm just kidding. So from my understanding and the research I've done is that when it comes to your dominant type, that is something that does not shift, it does not change, which I think bothers some people, makes them feel like labeled and boxed in. But then what's really special about the Enneagram, and this is where I think it really differs from something like Myers-Briggs, or whether you're a beaver, lion, dolphin, or tambourine, or whatever you are, is the idea that within that one type, I mean, we're talking about, say, like for me, I identify as a type 7. Okay. After, I don't know, 4 or 5 months of digging, I just couldn't hide it anymore. It's like, I'm a 7. Here we are. And I think you read that and you're kind of like, oh, well, that's all I am, just a 7. But then, man, you start to dig deeper into wings and then subtypes. And then whether you're really pulling from stress or security points, or if you look at things like level of development, different things like that. And there's a ton of layers to this that I think can really help people understand that having a dominant type is not a bad thing. It's not limiting. It actually, I love how Ian Cron says it a lot of times on his podcast, is that the Enneagram shows you more of what you're not than what you are, and really creates space for so much development and so much growth and potential. And he always references the fact that we as people identify more with what we do wrong than what we do right. And I love that when you start to really dig into your dominant type and begin to see what you're capable of, what those things like you felt like were strengths, or maybe even what you thought were weaknesses, can actually bring a lot of value to your community, to your job, to your family, whatever. So yeah, that's my thoughts on that. What about you, man?
Yeah. So I would agree. I would say the answer to that is no. I put a little asterisk on my no, which I'll come back around to in just a minute. Okay. But the other things I want to talk about in that conversation are, I do hear a couple things from people sometimes who in this part of the conversation. And one of those is, well, I took the test a few years ago and I got this, but now I took it again and I got a different number. And so I used to be this, but now I'm this, right? And what I tell people in that instance is, well, honestly, probably what happened was at least one of those assessments was wrong, right? And maybe the new one that you took's right. Maybe they're both wrong. Assessments, I think, can be a good thing, and we'll talk about those more in a future episode. And I think they can be helpful and can be accurate, but I also think that they can be wrong. And so yeah, I see that sometimes. The other thing that I hear from people is, well, I think I'm this number, but I learned to be this number, other number, right? Like I was in an environment so long that only valued these things which go with a number that I'm not, and I learned to operate in that. And so I totally get that, right? When people talk like that, that makes a lot of sense to me. But one of the things that people, I think, sometimes misunderstand with the Enneagram is it's not nearly as much about what you do as it is about why you do what you do, right? Yeah. And so you can be let's say in a job or in an environment that values threeness and all the qualities of threes, and act like a three, but that may not actually change your motivation, right? And so that's hard to identify sometimes, because obviously motivation is on the inside. It's not necessarily your external actions. And so while you may act like a three or whatever number it is, you may be motivated like a five. And that's what your Enneagram number is. So it feels like it can change from season to season, job to job, culture to culture. But in reality, it doesn't change, because the Enneagram's not about the external expression. It's about the internal motivation, right? That makes sense what I'm saying?
Oh yeah, man. Absolutely. So good. And something we won't cover this on the span of these questions, but I've also heard people reference, like when we use the phrases like integration and disintegration, or security and stress points, is that I've heard people say something like, okay, well, I'm a 7, but when I'm stressed, I become a 1. Right. Or when I'm healthy, I become a 5, and referencing like integration. So where you move, or what you borrow from, the characteristics and the types that you borrow traits from in either like stress or security. And let's just go ahead and clarify that you don't actually become that number. Right. You just begin to borrow some of those traits. And then if you actually look at the diagram itself, that's what those lines represent. And so, I've heard people say like, well, right now I'm actually, I'm a 7, but right now I'm really operating as a 5. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but that's not right. And so, just to clear those things up. And so that's one of the cool things about the dynamic aspects of the Enneagram is that we all kind of borrow from each other in different ways and things like that. But like you said, that motivation isn't going to change. And I think that's the special part. And then there's even different ways, like I'll just reference this real quick, is that one of the things that has been helpful for me in helping people identify what that type is beginning to look at the head, heart, and gut triads. And it would take some time to explain that, but basically the idea is like how you process the world, how you interpret and engage with the things around you, whether that being through your thoughts immediately, through your feelings immediately, or through your kind of instinctive nature immediately. Right. And that's been really helpful, because I think it's helped me like help other people identify what that dominant type is, because not only is the motivation there, but also like, hey, I typically respond through my emotions. Right. So what that tells me is that, okay, you're probably going to be either a 2, a 3, or a 4 that are in that feeling or heart triad. So that's another can of worms, but something that's been helpful for me trying to help other people. So absolutely.
So I'll explain my asterisk really quick on my answer before. So can your number change over time? What I tell people is that no, it doesn't change over time, with just the smallest exception. I believe that major traumatic events can really alter people's personalities. And I'm not talking about like you failed a class. I'm talking about like, people going off to war and seeing, really traumatic things, going through really, really traumatic experiences. That kind of stuff can really alter people's personalities. I just say that because I don't want those things to be taken too lightly about the kind of impact they can have on who people are and what motivates them. And so I do think that plays a big factor in that. And so my answer to that question, now coming back full circle, is no, with that just little asterisk there, that some major traumatic events can shift people's personalities a little bit. So
good thoughts, man. Love it.
Cool. Well, we'll wrap it up there and come back next time with question number 3.
All right. See you next time.
Hey, thanks for joining us today on another Enneagram podcast.
As fellow leaders, we know it can be frustrating when it seems like you always run into the same problems on your team with the same people. But leaders just like you are learning how to lead their teams better using the Enneagram, and you can too.
So if you like what you heard today, we would love it if you would share this podcast on social media. And leave a rating or review wherever you listen to podcasts, preferably only good, reviews and ratings. That would be great.
If you'd like to connect with us, you can find us on Instagram. We're at Another Enneagram, or head over to our website, anotherenneagram.com.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode of Another Enneagram Podcast.